One.
Hello, everybody. This is take two of number 11 on the subject of ancient history. Well, the big event was in 9700 BCE, or 11,700 years ago. And that's when we went from the Pleistocene Epoch to our current epoch, which is known as the Holocene Epoch. The Pleistocene Epoch was very cold. It was an ice age that lasted for over 2 million years. The human race developed during this time when the temperature on the planet was 8 to 10 degrees Celsius, or 15 to 18 degrees Fahrenheit uh, lower than it is now. And there is general thought that this was a hunter gatherer society. There were not great organized social structures and no temples, as far as we know. Well, the first temples seem to be assemblies of stones that hunter gatherers would put up. There doesn't seem to be any kind of signs of an economy around those monuments. Later on, it developed to what we call a palace economy, and that was definitely a hierarchical type of structure where there was a king at the top, priests, other courtiers, people who made everybody else work. And these palaces would be enormous with thousands of people in there making things. So this had to get resources from outside, and it had to basically enclose the territory which provided it with resources. And of course, you can find more slaves when you're out there expanding your territory. Slavery, by the way, it goes back well before writing. We don't even know when that started. It could have even been in hunter gatherer times. Slavery was often a consequence of war. If you were defeated in war, you became the slave of the person that conquered you. And some ethics about that were gradually developed, and we see in the Ten Commandments that you should give your slaves one day off in seven. And after the Ten Commandments, after a few more things you must do to worship the deity, there's more civil law about slaves, including that you have to manumit them, set them free after 6 years and a day. So slavery seemed to be inevitable. It's what they called the law of nations, the law of people, the law of humanity. That was different from natural law, because natural law was what all the animals did, and they concluded that because animals didn't enslave each other, it had to be some other law of nature which was only applied to human beings. Nope, slavery was inevitable, but you have to keep that perspective when you're looking at the ancient world. All of us have ancestors who were slaves. Some of us got our freedom generations more than others did. But we've all been through slavery if we exist now. Because 99% of the people in the world are now not slaves. So the slaves must have outbred the slave masters, didn't they? So, yeah, slavery is wrong, but all the ancient texts don't say that because they just assumed it was normal human behavior. And the best thing that God could do was to tell you to treat them fairly. And so, if you're going to look at ancient history, understand that slavery was inevitable. In according to the Torah law, the other way, they didn't really have the thing about taking prisoners in war, but they did have two ways that you could become a slave. And one was to sell yourself into slavery, and the other one was to be punished. Say you stole something and you had to work off the debt. You would be enslaved to the person that you committed the crime against. So those were sort of the two ways in Judaic law, and the two ways in Roman law were that you could bring slaves home from war, and you could also sell them into slave. You could sell yourself into slavery. So it's a pretty horrible choice because when you become a slave, you are civilly dead. You are actually no longer a person that can exercise any legal rights whatsoever. And you can do nothing of legal consequence. You're not. You're just a farm animal. That's all you are when you're a slave. You're just livestock. That's how they're traded in the old days. So different kinds of livestock. What I got? Oh, I got cows. I got sheep. I got slaves. And what do you want? It was trade, and the slave trade um, was mentioned as being evil, even by Paul and Timothy. Slave traders were considered to be bad people. And the Romans also, if they saw that you had brutalized and starved your slaves, they would force you to sell them and that you were not allowed to be the buyer. You were not allowed to buy them back. It's quite clearly one of the things I read in the Codex. The other matters of slaves, they seem to bring in more and more laws where you could kind of escape your fate. Technicalities, they brought in a lot of technicalities where you could go. And they were very, very strict about letting you go when the deal was done. So that's a common morality. I have no idea if the Romans ever read the Torah. It certainly looks like they didn't. But it seems that their law has kind of eventually evolved towards the same set of common moral values. So there's all of the evidence of ancient history points to an intangible God that is not material. It points to liberation from slavery. It points to equality of opportunity, and it points to judgment based on fairness. I've been reading this more, and they really twisted the word equity beyond all recognition. Equity of outcome is equity. Equality of outcome is equality. It's not equity. If you want equality of outcome, say equality of outcome. Equity is judging for each case. And if somebody only needs 300 a month and another person needs 1,000 a month, why would you give them both 600 a month? How is that fair for the person who's got only needs 300 a month, who feels guilty about taking the other 300, and the other person who needs 1,000 a month who's only getting 600 and they're not getting enough? And that's not fair to either. So, and it's the same thing, even down to criticism of the left, right? They don't consider individuals. And that's what we've been banging on about, is that it's the growth of the individual consciousness as something motive, something that can move forward and achieve things, positive things for itself, for its loved ones, and for the world. That's what the whole trace of history is.